Everyone knows Peter Pan, the magical boy who flies through nursery windows, sprinkling fairy dust and promising adventure. But here's what Disney desperately didn't want you to know. In J.M. Barrie's original text, Peter doesn't just lead the Lost Boys, he eliminates them. When they show signs of growing up, which is against the rules, Peter thins them out. He forgets his friends the moment they die, their names erased from his mind like they never existed. He isn't a hero who saves children. He's something far more sinister, a creature that collects them, uses them, and discards them when they're no longer useful. But the most disturbing part isn't the fiction, it's the devastating reality that inspired it. This is a story of real tragedy, about how one man's psychological damage became the blueprint for one of the most famous children's characters ever created. And the real boys who inspired Peter Pan, the actual children whose games in Kensington Gardens became the source material for Neverland, they met fates so horrific that people began to whisper about a curse. It begins not in Neverland, but in a Scottish household in 1867. James Matthew Barrie was just 6 years old when his 13-year-old brother David died in a skating accident. David and James were Margaret Barrie's only two sons, and David wasn't just any brother. He was the golden child, their mother, Margaret's unmistakable favourite, the one who could do no wrong. It was sudden and brutal, a fall on the ice just the day before his 14th birthday. The shock wave that hit the Barrie household wasn't just grief. It was a complete psychological shattering. Margaret took to her bed in a darkened room, refusing to see anyone, completely lost in a sorrow so profound it transformed her into something unrecognizable. But their mother, Margaret, didn't just grieve. She found comfort in a thought that would haunt her surviving son forever. The idea that her dead child would remain a boy eternally, never to grow up and leave her. Young James watched his mother slip away into this obsession with her frozen-in-time golden child, and like any desperate child seeking love, he tried everything to win her back. He wore David's clothes. He read to her in David's voice. He literally tried to become his dead brother. But Margaret remained lost in her grief, emotionally present, but psychologically absent, forever mourning the boy who would never age, the boy who, in her state of mind, had achieved eternal childhood. The damage this inflicted on James Barrie would manifest in ways that make Peter Pan's creation seem almost inevitable. As an adult, Barrie stood only 5 feet 3 inches tall, his voice never fully deepening, remaining high-pitched and boyish throughout his life. In 1894, he married actress Mary Ansell, but the marriage collapsed after 15 years. Mary would later reveal the marriage was never consummated. Barrie was psychologically incapable of adult physical love. She wrote that he remained a boy who could not, or would not, grow up, still wearing his dead brother's clothes, still speaking in his dead brother's voice. His body had become a prison of eternal childhood, and from that prison, Peter Pan would eventually escape into the world. In Kensington Gardens, a 40-year-old Barrie, childless, emotionally stunted, encountered Sylvia and Arthur Llewellyn Davies and their 5 sons, George, Jack, Peter, Michael, and Nicholas. These were upper-middle-class London boys with servants and nursemaids, living the comfortable Victorian childhood that Barrie himself had lost. He charmed them instantly, wiggling his ears, dancing with his dog, telling fantastic stories. The boys called him Uncle Jim. Their games in the park became legendary. Pirates, castaways, redskins, all meticulously recorded in Barrie's notebooks. By 1904, just 4 years after meeting them, Barrie had transformed their childhood adventures into Peter Pan, or The Boy Who Wouldn't Grow Up, which premiered at the Duke of York's Theatre to instant acclaim. The Davies boys watched themselves immortalised on stage while their parents still lived, unaware they were witnessing their own futures being written. When Arthur died in 1907 and Sylvia followed from cancer in 1910, the fiction became prophecy. Barrie became the boys' legal guardian. He had been secretly in love with Sylvia, another mother figure forever out of reach. And now he had her children. These were the real lost boys, orphaned just like their stage counterparts. What had begun as innocent park games had become their actual lives, motherless boys with an emotionally complex guardian who could never quite be a father. The play that captivated the world had somehow manifested itself into reality, as if Barry's imagination had cursed the very children who inspired it. The real Lost Boys started dying young, just like their fictional counterparts who never grew up, but for far darker reasons. George, the eldest, was killed in World War I at age 21. Michael, who was especially close to Barry, drowned at Oxford under mysterious circumstances at the same age. Michael was Barry's absolute favourite, the one who most embodied the spirit of Peter Pan. But Michael's final years were haunted by something that makes his death even more disturbing. At Oxford, he suffered from chronic insomnia and recurring nightmares, specifically nightmares about drowning. He wrote to Barry about these dreams, describing how he would wake gasping for air, feeling water filling his lungs. His letters grew increasingly dark, speaking of a shadow following him, of feeling pulled toward water. On May 19, 1921, that pull became fatal. Michael drowned at Sandford Lock, a notorious spot on the Thames that locals had long called Dead Man's Pool, a place where the undercurrents were vicious and where other young men had chosen to end their lives. He was with his closest friend, Rupert Buxton, both weak swimmers, both just 21 years old. The official verdict was accidental drowning, but their bodies were found clasped together in an embrace that suggested something far more deliberate. Rupert had left behind a note, immediately destroyed by his family, and witnesses reported the two had been drinking and talking about never having to grow old. They entered the water together, fully clothed, at the most dangerous point of the pool. They didn't struggle. They simply sank, holding each other, choosing Neverland over tomorrow. For Barry, this was the apocalypse. His diary entry that night consisted of just 8 words that revealed everything. Michael gone, all my world gone with him. The line between accident and a willed escape from adulthood hadn't just blurred, it had shattered completely, leaving Barry to wonder if his fairy tale had become a death wish. Peter Llewellyn Davies, who gave his very name to Barry's creation, carried the heaviest burden of all. Throughout his adult life, he was haunted by being the real Peter Pan. He called the play that terrible masterpiece and spent decades trying to escape its shadow. The association followed him everywhere, in business, in relationships, in quiet moments when strangers would recognize his name and their eyes would light. He turned to alcohol, sinking into depressions that grew deeper with age. His own children reported he would fly into rages when Peter Pan was mentioned. In 1960, at age 63, after years of fighting the ghost of his childhood self, Peter walked to Sloane Square Underground Station and threw himself under a train. His final note contained a bitter truth. The whole business of Peter Pan has been a terrible burden on our family, but even the Davies boys who survived carried scars. Jack lived to 65, but refused every single interview about Barry or Peter Pan, maintaining a silence so complete it seemed like its own kind of death. Nicholas, the youngest, survived to 73, but spent much of his adult life defending Barry against implications of impropriety, a defensive crusade that consumed him. Of the 5 boys who played in Kensington Gardens, 2 never saw their 22nd birthday, 1 chose death by train, and the remaining 2 lived in either total silence or endless justification. In the story, the Lost Boys never grow up because they live in magical Neverland. In reality, the Davies boys were trapped in their own version of Neverland, one that killed them young or haunted them forever. But the real horror isn't just what happened to the Davies boys. It's what Barry wrote into the original text itself, details that Disney scrubbed clean. In the 1911 novel, Barry drops the mask completely. He writes that when the Lost Boys seem to be growing up, which is against the rules, Peter thins them out. While Disney portrays Peter as a savior, the book portrays him as an executioner. This isn't just a plot point. It is a brutal symbol of Barry's own pathology. In his world, Adulthood is a capital offense. The thinning out implies that the moment you stop being an innocent plaything, you are discarded. This cruelty in the fiction mirrors the intensity of the author in real life. In a secret letter discovered years later, Barry wrote to young Michael Davies, the one who would eventually drown, describing himself as a greasy candle that is bent in the middle. He ended the note with a chilling instruction: "I am very fond of you, but don't tell anybody." It is a glimpse into a relationship defined by a strange, suffocating dependency, and Barry poured that darkness directly into the character of Peter Pan. In another detail Disney removed, Peter flies to the Darling house ahead of the children to put iron bars on their window, tricking them into believing their parents had abandoned them. If he could convince them they were unloved, they would have no choice but to belong to him forever. And terrifyingly, this fictional kidnapping might have been a confession of a real one. When the Davies' mother died, her will instructed the boys to be left in the care of Jenny, their nanny. But Barry, who transcribed the will, claimed she wrote Jimmy, his name. Many historians believe he forged it. With a stroke of a pen, he acquired the children he had obsessed over, trapping them in his care just as Peter trapped the lost boys in Neverland. In the original text, Peter isn't a charming boy. He is a creature of body horror. Barry describes Peter's breathing as fast and short, distinct from human breathing, like a frantic animal. He writes that Peter's body periodically changes shape to fit through the tree hollows. These aren't descriptions of a child. They are descriptions of a changeling, something that mimics youth but isn't quite human. And just as his body doesn't hold a single form, his mind refuses to hold a single memory. His eternal youth comes at the price of eternal amnesia. Barry writes that Peter forgets everything, including people who loved him. When he returns to find Wendy grown up with a daughter, he has no memory of their adventures, no recollection of Tinker Bell who died for him, no recognition of the lost boys he once led or later thinned out. To him, people aren't individuals to be cherished. They are transient experiences to be forgotten. Every friendship, every adventure, every moment of connection is erased from his mind like chalk from a board. Peter Pan isn't blessed with eternal childhood. He's cursed with eternal loneliness, forever meeting people for the first time, forever trapped in a present that means nothing because it connects to nothing. The book concludes with Peter forgetting Wendy and returning years later to take her daughter. Then, he takes her granddaughter. The individual child never truly mattered to him. Only their youth did. They were just fuel for his fantasy, replaceable batteries in a toy that never stops playing. Peter Pan is ultimately a damaged man's attempt to process his destroyed childhood, and a curse that followed the real children who inspired it to their early graves. When Barry died in 1937, he left the copyright to Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital. But this carries dark irony, a story born from death, funding the fight against childhood death. We tell our children this is a story about magic and adventure, but now you know the truth. Peter Pan was never about the wonder of childhood. It was a confession disguised as a fairy tale, written by a man whose trauma became a blueprint for tragedy.